It is Friday, July 25th. Let's talk PlayStation. Welcome back, everyone, to another Wu Chang episode of LTPS. As always, let's begin with our PS Plus reminder. If you have not just yet, make sure you claim your July games before they go away. Also, a very quick reminder for Abiotic Factor, which was a day one PS5 version launch into PS Plus Extra that came out on the 22nd, so this is also live on PSN right now as well. And going into our first news story, we have a new PS5 system software beta, so the invites were already sent out to those in the beta program. And it's got two big changes, one that's actually available, one that's not right now, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the big one is what Sony already told us about a few weeks ago, which is being able to pair a DualSense or DualSense Edge to multiple devices. So this firmware now has that. Over on the PS blog, Sony outlined exactly how you can do this. So you can pair up to 4 devices simultaneously, and to pair a controller, you have to make sure it's off and then hold one of the face buttons and the PS button for more than 5 seconds. Then the light bar and the player indicator is going to flash twice, and then you turn on the device you want to sync, select the option to add Bluetooth devices from, say, your PC or a mobile phone, and then you select the controller, the light bar is going to light up, and then the player indicator blinks according to the assigned slot that you gave it. So now that it's paired, you can swap between devices by pressing the PS button and the corresponding face button that you assign that device to. So you can do this with the controller on or off, and for example, the PS blog shows 4 different devices that you could assign, and that could be a PS5 and a PS5 Pro, so 2 different PlayStation consoles, then a Windows PC and an iPhone, and each one is assigned to a different face button. So it might seem a little convoluted, but at the very least, it's something that in practice is not going to be hard to end up figuring out, and I think this is just a huge quality of life update. It's going to be so much easier now to be able to use like my 2 DualSense Edge controllers and just have them assigned to different PS5s and also PC or mobile if I want to go about doing that. It's definitely a big pain to have to always whip out the cable and resync manually if I do move controllers around, so definitely a big deal there. The other part of the firmware, which is not in the beta just yet, or rather it's not accessible, but it is a new low power mode, which might sound very familiar, but Sony did outline that this will be something that users can use themselves. So the low power mode, it's part of SIE's commitment to Sony's Road to Zero environmental plan, and this update is going to offer something called Power Saver. Now this, again, won't be available during the beta, but the wide release will have this, and if you turn it on, then your console is going to use less power and scale back performance on supported PS5 games. Which it sounds like you can turn this on, and if a game doesn't support this, then it will still use the full bandwidth, the full power of the console, and you'll be able to run the game just fine, and you'll not have any sort of throttled performance. But it is something that, as we saw from a rumor not too long ago, where developers were being briefed on this new low power mode, that they could then lean into and properly support, so their games are at least, you know, very mindful of that approach as far as scaling back frame rate and resolution, whatever the case might be. But if developers are being briefed on this now, then it's something where over time more and more titles will have this as an option. Now, the really big news here, of course, is that this is official. The rumor prior was that developers were being briefed on this mode because it's, you know, obviously, as SIE does say, and it's very true with their commitment to the environmental plan, that's something they want to achieve net zero by fiscal year 2040, I think, somewhere around there. That's obviously true, but there is the other angle of it, which is developers are being briefed now because this could be a compatibility layer for the rumored PlayStation Handheld by 2027, 28, and that device would certainly need something where developers will have to lean into that device a bit more, or at least be mindful of it given the TDP of the device. When we're talking about heat, thermals, and things like that for a handheld, realistically not the big scale AAA PS5 only stuff nowadays is going to run reasonably well on that thing, and certainly for battery life as well. But in the here and now, it sounds like, okay, developers are being briefed on it, so we could very well have this thing show up by 27, 28. And the good thing about a local PlayStation handheld, or at least on paper, is that you want to log into PSN on this thing, and then all your PS4 stuff plays the vast majority of PS5, and then whatever Sony plans on doing as far as mandates for PlayStation 6. Realistically, we don't even know if this low power mode is, well, I would safely think it's not a mandate right now for developers to support, but in theory they could have a hard mandate eventually while they're, you know, given this sort of transitionary period of it's here, you can use it, and that will sort of future-proof and offer a compatibility layer for a number of games that we are buying and playing today for this potential handheld again in 27, 28. So that's really, it's not a confirmation, obviously, but it's pretty easily telegraphed based on a rumor we heard prior, and now this is something official that consumers will be able to toggle just for the console experience, mind you. So that is good to see. If you were looking forward to a local play PlayStation handheld, that I think says a lot more than just their environmental plans. Next up, we have a little issue going on with PlayStation Network avatars, which most people know at this point from PS4 onward. Sony was heavily prioritizing using a different picture or a real-life picture. At the time, it was Facebook integration, so it would pull your Facebook picture, but using a real name and a different picture on PSN. But you could still use legacy avatars on PSN. Well, the point is, we're hearing that there's been some issues with PS3 era premium avatars. Nowadays, from PS4 onward, there's not really an easy way to see or view or buy premium avatars. Typically now it's just code redemptions for if a game has a tie-in or something, or if Sony's giving them away, then those will show up in your avatar selection. But usually to buy PS3 era ones, you have to do that from a PlayStation 3. Well, the news here, reported by Push Square and citing a Reset Era thread, is that a number of users are reporting that their premium avatars from the PS3 era have gone missing when checking for them on PS4, PS5, or the PS Mobile app. And if you have one set, then that's fine, obviously, but if you were to swap it out, that means you would lose access to it. And I remember hearing about this every so often for the past, I want to say a month or so. Every so often people have been reaching out saying, hey, this is a thing that's been going on. And it seems like now it's maybe getting a little bit more prevalent, which I can confirm from my end. I have some PS3 premium avatars, and it's the same thing where they don't appear on PS4, 5, or the mobile app anymore. But here's the crux of the issue. They're not gone per se, or at least I'm fairly certain. So what is a huge pain here is that if you want to re-access these, you have to, from a PlayStation 3, I think also from a Vita would work as well. I have not tested this, but you can go through your download list and find that download and re-download it. So you can reactivate the license, select it from there, and that's one of those weird, quirky PSN backend things. But of course, that is a massive pain for anybody that doesn't have a PS3 or Vita on hand right now. So they're not entirely gone. As far as I'm aware, most people, if you have access to like a legacy console, you should be able to reassign an older PS3 era avatar. But as far as licensing the back end and these things appearing on the newer machines, newer platforms, that's annoying. So definitely one of those quirky things with PSN. Hopefully with enough noise, maybe Sony would be aware of this and maybe try to address this issue, which sometimes they will do in cases like this. Although I would not be surprised at all if this is like very low on the totem pole of like things that need to be addressed. But since people did pay 50 cents for these avatars back then, I would like that to be attached to my account at all times on modern platforms. Let's move on to some PlayStation Studio news, beginning with Ghost of Yotei, where we have more new details on this game. So once again, the creative director Nate Fox was speaking with, this time, Automaton Media, going over the open world in the game and those segments where you might be running into certain things that you can explore more of. So you look back at Tsushima and you think of the haikus, the fox dens, the bamboo shoots. And so Sucker Punch is taking in that feedback from Tsushima, and they're trying to improve these segments in the game that might have you exploring. So you think about all those things, right? Nate is trying to let people know that they've prepared different kinds of outcomes now that could go beyond the player expectations. So it sounds like they're trying to maybe not have them be so formulaic, and that when you run into the fox den, for example, you know exactly what you're doing, which is following the fox until you get to the den, and then that's pretty much it. Which I don't think is necessarily a problem per se. I mean, I'm sure some people got sick of those after doing 2 or 3 of them. My thing was always, and this is maybe more particular to me, but you'd run into the fox den and then see a haiku and then maybe the spring far away. Like it wouldn't be uncommon to see like 2 or 3 things at a time within your sight line It's kind of, I guess, sensory overload of like, oh, which one do I do? Let me follow this one. Oh, now it pulled me too far away from the ones that I had seen earlier. How do I get back to those? So they're not really saying that here. They just want to make sure that everything that you do engage with, maybe it's always a little bit different versus the first time that you did it, which is also good. I mean, I'll certainly take variety as well, which that goes into our next news story here, and that is the overall game length as well, which we're hearing it's basically in the same ballpark as Tsushima, which if you look back to, or at least the reported numbers from How Long to Beat, the game's anywhere from 25-ish hours on the main campaign and then doing all the extra content and going for a platinum. That can be anywhere from 40 hours upwards of 65, 70. So that was from Jason Cannell. He was speaking with VGC, pretty much saying that, yeah, the game is going to feature a similar length and scope to Tsushima, which that I'm also completely okay with. I do not need this game overstaying its welcome and doing even more than it needs to from Tsushima. And arguably, if they're going to be spending more time trying to add more variety to the handful of things that were there in that, again, 25 to 65 hour experience, then it will feel much more fresh to add more variety in what is the same window. So I think they're saying, for the most part, all the right things right now. Next up, Marvel Tokon will be playable at EVO 2025, so that kicks off on August 1st. Really not that long until we'll have probably a lot of impressions come out from the fighting game community about how they feel about this game. So there's going to be a playable build on the show floor. I imagine it will be very popular and very tough to get time in on, but it is going to be there, playable on the show floor, and you'll be able to play as Captain America, Iron Man, Miss Marvel, Star-Lord, Storm, and Doctor Doom. And you could obviously see the tie-in there, given that Sony has joint ownership in EVO, and now they've got their own fighter, basically, and this is going to be a pretty high-profile fighter, given the IP as well. So you'd have to imagine, yeah, it's going to be at EVO, and we'll have a lot of impressions coming out of that event as well. So if you've got your eyes on Marvel Tokon, then you won't have to wait too long to hear some impressions. Moving on to Developer Ready at Dawn, which are closed, but it's been a very fascinating past few months, I'd say, with the co-founders, both Andrea and Rue, finally talking a lot more candidly about the studio's history, also their relationship with Sony, what went right with Daxter and God of War, but also what went wrong with the Order 1886. And so in this case, we now have Rue speaking with Christopher Dring of the games business and being very candid about their acquisition, and that he's openly saying they were not looking to be acquired by Meta in 2020, and actually they wanted to go back to PlayStation, saying, and I quote here, "We were quite happy being independent. Back in 2019, we were working on PS5. We had dev kits. That's what I communicated to Meta. I said, look guys, I don't know where VR is going because we don't know the long-term plans, but we have a hunger to do great things in VR. We also have a hunger to do great things on the PS5. He goes on to say that Meta and Mark Zuckerberg's vision is what eventually convinced them, but 4 years on, that alignment became something else, and that led to the closure. So as of right now, Rue became an investor and advisor in a new team called Atlantis Studio. He's getting a bit more involved there, but it's still going to remain small for now, so they're looking to target a AA type budget, and they don't want to go beyond 25, 30 people. That studio's also in France, which he got into that as well. The cost of running a game studio in California, which is not the first time we've heard how expensive that can be, but really fascinating. I think that is the first time we've ever heard that Ready at Dawn did have PlayStation 5 dev kits, and they had every intention of presumably going back to 2D development on PS5. I mean, certainly PSVR 2 would have maybe been on the cards as well, but maybe there was some kind of timeline here where they could have had another financial backing partnership with Sony to do a new game on PlayStation 5. Not saying that would be a sequel to The Order. I'm not sure if Sony would want to greenlight a sequel, since we already know they did not go forward with that in 2015, but potentially a new IP would have been very fascinating. So it's cool to hear those stories, especially knowing that there was a timeline out there where they would have loved to go back. But this is also the other crux of the issue with these conversations surrounding acquisitions and acquisition targets and what Sony may or may not want to do. Oftentimes the studios don't want to be acquired. However, and maybe this is something Rue is not willing to outline and not completely be a bit more candid here, but surely the paycheck was a lot, or the bag was quite big. if they didn't want to be acquired, why did they go out and do it? Oh yeah, was it really the vision, or was it that sales pitch alongside what was likely something you can't really turn down in that moment? So while it sounds like they regret it, might be really tough for them to say or openly admit, but it's just crazy to know that we did have some kind of timeline out there where they came back to PlayStation. In other business-related news, Sony and Bandai Namco have signed a new strategic partnership where Sony is going to acquire 16 million shares for 68 billion yen, and that's going to make them a 2.5% shareholder of Bandai Namco. In yesterday's press release, they say this alliance is going to focus on expanding the fan community of IP around anime and manga and merging their strengths to create new and emotionally moving experiences for fans, maximizing the value of IP. Now, if that sounds familiar, that's because it is. That seems to be the play with a lot of these minority investments that Sony makes in these other companies. The play typically does seem to be the anime and manga side, where the company that's taking in that investment and selling those shares is looking for the distribution channels that Sony has, that publishing arm. And so likely that's what they are looking to do. I mean, it's in the press release. There's nothing in here about games per se. We know that they have a long-standing partnership in games, even as recent as doing something like Sony licensing out their IP to Bandai Namco. So that's all well and good, but a lot of these alliances do tend to lean more on the anime and manga side, which arguably for some people that might be a problem given Sony already has such a very well-positioned arm in that space. But that is what they're always looking to do. I would imagine, too, that if this does work out for them, we might see another investment in 1 or 2 years. They tend to increase their stakes in these partnerships if it does work out in a very lucrative way for both companies. Let's move on to some third-party news, with Cyberpunk 2077 getting patch 2.3 recently on PS5 and PS5 Pro. And if you're playing on a Pro, then this patch is a big deal because, well, it's not a Pro enhancement, but it's VRR. So the game now officially supports VRR, and you can unlock the frame rate on a 120Hz display, which, if you're playing on PS5 Pro, that console is going to push the frame rate up to an average of 80 frames per second, which comes in right on time for the recent PS Plus debut of this game. So there really is no better time to play it for the first time, although if there is a Pro enhancement that shows up later down the road with ray tracing enabled, that would be great as well, obviously. So that's the thing, games are always getting better over time, especially these more high-profile single-player titles that the studio is always updating and addressing bugs and doing things like this. So usually the longer you wait, the better. But what's also so great about so many games now getting these VRR patches or just modes that have an unlocked frame rate is that if you don't have a Pro right now, that's totally fine. By the time we get PlayStation 6, if we think conceivably it will play a lot of the titles that we are enjoying nowadays and it will boost the frame rate of these games for how they stand, then you ideally want more games that have unlocked frame rate caps, or having no cap rather, right? So that's also the beneficial thing about news stories like this. In other PS5 Pro news, we have a confirmed 60 FPS game at native 8K, and that is Pure Pro Pool, which obviously is the kind of thing where the game is very small in scope. It's a very tight sort of experience as far as what they have to render on screen. So does that really surprise anybody that maybe the one 8K native game we could get on Pro running at a high frame rate as this? No, not necessarily, but I still think there's a novelty to it. I mean, it's so easy to point at this, laugh, and go, okay, but who has an 8K display? The adoption rate for 8K has been incredibly slow. But again, it's like the novelty of it. I kind of love when there's the handful of things that pop up super early like this. There's so many clear parallels to when you look at PlayStation 2 and the few 1080i games that console had at the time as well, right? I think it's kind of neat to have these things pop up for PS5 Pro where, sure enough, yes, there is, a handful of 8K games, and here's another one. Moving on to Test Drive Unlimited Solar Crown, where most of the players on this game are on PlayStation 5, and that is the news. I mean, oftentimes in games we have this circumstance of, and I think it's really exasperated nowadays, but a lot of players do tend to look at player counts on Steam because that is the only thing that we tend to have if there is no public data as far as sales for a game goes, right? So it's oftentimes not easy to talk about how well a game is or is not doing. And sometimes we have developers push back on that idea of, having this tunnel vision on Steam player counts. And so we actually had this pop up from Push Square where Nakon's Sebastian Waxen told them during a developer Q&A that looking at Steam concurrent player counts is not a good metric. They said, and I quote here, "A lot of players are watching Steam concurrent numbers because they're the only statistics available. But the Steam community for Test Drive Unlimited is not the biggest, and the difference can be very big between PS5, which is the most active platform for our game. So we know people are looking at Steam because it's the only numbers available, but trust me, it's not representative at all." Which, mind you, the peak player count for Test Drive on Steam is 5,305, which is a reasonably sized number, but that is definitely where, that's the issue. The thing is, I think the safest way to reasonably look at Steam player counts is when there's just very big extremes. And that if a game is debuting in the hundreds of thousands for a peak player count, you can safely look at that and go, that game is doing incredibly well, successful. Now, by internal metrics, that might look very different depending on the publisher, but it's kind of easy to eyeball that and go, okay, a lot of traffic, the game's doing reasonably okay, versus something that maybe is, you can identify it's a AAA game, but it's in the low thousands. So when they're extremes, I think that's one way to look at Steam player counts, but otherwise, the issue does tend to be it's the only thing in a lot of cases, so it's really hard to have a conversation surrounding those games when that is the only number to go by, and it's just simply concurrent numbers, not at all the total numbers sold. Moving on to more Final Fantasy IX Remake or Remaster speculation happenings going on. So the news here is that there's this new original CG art for the latest issue of Famitsu. It does look quite nice, but that is the thing, is that it's more new key art for the 25th anniversary. So there's still a lot of people hoping that this announcement does come at some point, which it was important to clarify for the anniversary. There's a difference between when it launches in North America and Japan, so there's still time left for this thing to possibly be revealed if it is still a thing behind the scenes, which I would think it still is. I mean, we did have the rumor from Nate saying that he needs to check in on the game again, see where it is, the status of it, and what have you, but considering the NVIDIA leak list has not been wrong, I mean, surely the thing is real behind the scenes, just a matter of if it will have a formal announcement and it will eventually ship. You see something like this and how much reverence and appreciation that Square will have for the franchise, I think it's more a matter of time, but, it was still cool to see the key art, and it's still fascinating seeing a lot of the fans just get so stir crazy about it, and I'll reiterate, it's a game that I'd love to play at some point. I guess my question is, would I play this new version of the game, or should I go back to the original, which I'm typically a purist. I like to go back and play the original, so I think that's what I ideally would like to do. Moving on to Moon Studios, well known for doing the Ori games on Xbox and PC, and they eventually came to Nintendo Switch as well, but never PS4 or PlayStation 5, and the obvious context there is that at the time Microsoft was willing to sign on games and do exclusivity arrangements, and so for whatever reason those games just never came to PlayStation. We can kind of figure out what maybe is the reason for that, but also the studio could have moved on too, so even if they're allowed to ship on PlayStation, maybe they're just more concerned with what they're doing right now, which is this game in early access, No Rest for the Wicked. And the news is that that game is confirmed for PS5 and nothing else, which in the community Discord, the CEO and creative director Thomas Mahler said based on market conditions, they might only release the game on PS5 and possibly Switch 2, and that they would have to discuss this with Microsoft for what makes sense for Xbox. And that then got posted on Twitter, and Thomas replied to this concern saying they want to support consoles, but looking at the numbers, PS5 makes the most sense, and they'd like to ship on all, but likely not at the same time. Now, there's some very clear undertones here, the most obvious one being that based on install base, PlayStation 5 is where you would probably want to be. That and ideally Switch 2. I would argue, to be honest, that for a game like No Rest for the Wicked, you maybe would want to ship that on Switch 2 first. There's a novelty to try and get games on Switch 2 as early as possible for what is kind of not a small install base, but rather like a small collection of Switch 2 native games. but that's neither here nor there. Just that you can obviously read into that. But what you could also probably infer here, especially from the Discord message, is that there's no opportunity for Microsoft to foot the bill for their game. You know what I mean? That's what was the deal with Ori. You know, they had financial backing from Microsoft during a time where they were willing to back games in that way with exclusivity arrangements. It's a very different Microsoft nowadays. So if Moon Studios is in this position where this next game they're doing, if they have no direct publishing agreement in place, no financial backing, no kind of agreement, then what sort of position are they in right now when also the Xbox platform is just the install base is down year over year over year, and you know what I mean? So that's the sort of obvious read there, is that if we're not going to be able to get anything from them for this particular game, then we have to switch platforms. So is there anything really all that surprising about that? No, but you would have to figure that there's a handful of studios that have always had those ongoing partnerships with Microsoft, and those deals are pretty much not there anymore. They're not willing to sign those kind of arrangements. So there's not that much upside anymore, unless they're willing to obviously publish the game everywhere, which it seems like that's something Microsoft is willing to do, like with Ninja Gaiden. So it seems like they were just not able to secure something like that. Moving on to some more Xbox news, we have this recent post on the game business with Christopher Dring, where he was speaking with Matt Piscatella of Circana, and they were just going over the very multi-platform approach that all publishers and now platform holders are heavily leaning into. And towards the bottom of the post, Chris writes, and I quote here, Xbox is expected to announce more ports to other platforms, including Nintendo Switch 2 and PS5, in the coming weeks. So it seems like we will not have to wait that long at all for possibly more PlayStation 5 games getting announced, which at this point there's still a handful of things that have not come over. So that would be South of Midnight, Avowed, Starfield is probably the big one there. Also Halo Infinite, if they do end up doing Halo Infinite. I'm still not entirely convinced that Halo Infinite is going to come, and they will just wait for the next big Halo thing. But either way, it seems like, yeah, we can probably expect some Xbox ports to be announced fairly soon. Now, the other big Xbox news that came out recently was them walking back on the $80 price tag for their holiday season games. So we initially heard about this from Obsidian, where they confirmed for The Outer Worlds 2, it is being priced down to $70. They heard the concerns. They worked with the redacted publisher, which is obviously Microsoft, their parent organization, and so the game is going to be $70 this holiday season. But we did get a follow-up statement from IGN where Microsoft did confirm that their full-priced holiday releases are going to be the same moving forward. So they'll all be $69.99 USD, and that also includes the very big release of Call of Duty Black Ops 7. So that was one game, arguably, where it's like, oh, that would probably be, as I don't like to say it, but that's how it is, they would get away with that price tag for that kind of game versus something like The Outer Worlds 2. But I'm actually a little bit surprised. I didn't think they would do it for all games. I mean, The Outer Worlds, not surprising even remotely. I think a game like that, not to knock it, not to say it's not worth it. I haven't played it. I cannot speak at all to the quality of that game. I don't care whatever the game is. If I haven't played it, I mean, I don't want to take that leap of faith and say like, oh, it's not worth it. But realistically, it's very tough, I think, for any publisher, even Nintendo, in the case of Mario Kart World, to bump the price up that high, especially with the current economic concerns that we have, where everything is so incredibly expensive, and most consumers are being very picky and choosy with any sort of expendable income that they do have, any sort of entertainment things that they're willing to spend their money on. People are a lot more picky nowadays, rightfully so, on spending on entertainment. And so it's going to be really tough for an Outer Worlds 2 to command that price tag next to a Black Ops 7 or a Mario Kart World or a Grand Theft Auto 6 or really anything else. It's just a very big ask from publishers, and maybe that will set the stage for a lot of others going forward, or at least putting off what will inevitably happen. I think it's still something where a lot of publishers are willing to, or they want to start charging that amount, but if it starts to impede on overall sales, then of course they're not going to do that. It's just a matter of when it won't impede on sales, and maybe that's in a year, maybe that's in 2 years. We can all complain and moan about it, but the average selling price for games actually is over 70 at launch because there's so many deluxe editions. People are willing to pay for those, so the standard release, maybe it just needs a little bit more time for that to normalize, but I would not want that to happen. It's still not great to see these games get expensive as they are getting. Moving on to some video game sales data, courtesy of Matt Piscatella of Circana, which tracks video game sales data here in the US. And so for the month of June, we did get confirmation that yes, Nintendo Switch 2 was very successful. They sold 1.6 million units, and that did indeed dethrone PlayStation 4's record from 2013, where it sold 1.1 million. So it is now the fastest selling console in US history at 1.6 million, dethroning PlayStation 4. Which, I mean, kudos to Nintendo in that they were able to make enough of them. That's the really great thing about Switch 2, I find, even though there's been a lot of negative dialogue surrounding that console. But, I mean, I kind of really enjoy the fact that, at the very minimum, like, it's been readily available. A new machine just came out, very in demand, and they've made a lot of them. So even right now, there's, like, websites that have them in stock. There's stores locally that have them in stock. Now, there's so many different elements at play as far as why it's in stock, but we can't ignore the fact that there's just a lot of units available as well. So, in my book, at least, that's good, especially coming out of what was really tough for 2017 when the first Switch came out, but also 2020 with PlayStation 5 and these series consoles. The other June data that we have is that Death Stranding 2 on the Beach did debut at number 2, so happy to see that game doing quite well also on PlayStation 5. Next up, we have the full 2025 ChinaJoy lineup for PlayStation, where again, they are going to be at ChinaJoy from August 1st to the 4th, and they are bringing Black Myth Wukong, Exilage, Lost Soul Aside, Phantom Blade Zero, Retrace the Light, Tang Legends, Silent Strings, Unending Dawn, Vanishing Starlight, and Wuchang Fallen Feathers. So definitely a good lineup there. A lot of games that people will be playing on the show floor. Perhaps we'll get some decent impressions, a new trailer, maybe some confirmed dates. I know a lot of these games do still need those, but it's good to see Sony at ChinaJoy again, and they'll also be at TGS again as well. So they've got these very specific trade shows that they're willing to show up to now. And so at least with ChinaJoy, we'll have a lot of things come out of that in about 2 weeks. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or X, and if you would like to win a $10 PSN code, it is so simple. Follow the link down below or scan the QR code, enter the Gleam giveaway, and supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week, because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are all the news stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about with you all, and our Tuesday video was a little mini documentary of sorts on what it was like to get the Platinum Trophy in Concord during that very brief 3-day window that Sony gave for the server closure, and there was a handful of people trying to get the Platinum in time, so I interviewed somebody that did actually get the Platinum done in time, and they shared their experience, which was super cool. I feel bad though because Charles had reached out to possibly do that interview like around the time when that happened. So we filmed that before the Firewalk closure, and it took me so long to finally edit the final video and get it out there. But I'm so glad that for those that watched the video, you really enjoyed it. It'd be cool to do more things like that, but right now it's not doing that great, which honestly, YouTube's been a really tough platform as of late, so might have to start pimping the Patreon and YouTube channel memberships a little bit more. Any support helps work on projects like those because they can take a long time to edit and put together. So, you know, I hate doing that, but at the same time, it's like, I'd rather not start doing sponsorships. I take a lot of pride in how long we've come without doing sponsorships. No baked in ads or anything like that. I kind of love that we don't do that, but at the same time, I'd love to spend more time doing, you know, videos like the Concord thing or PSR, which I got to go back to the PSR uploads, the prior two ones that we did around, what was that, late 2024, those like bombed and didn't do very well, but they're so fun to put together. So, I mean, it's one of those things. Any support on Patreon, memberships, they go a long way. We've got a bunch of exclusive content and things on there, especially with the, we do quarterly Q&As, which we've got one listed right now. I'm going to film that probably this weekend. So if you want to support, submit a question. I spend like 2-something hours just answering a bunch of questions, and it's always a really fun time. So yeah, again, might have to start bringing that up every now and again, but don't feel inclined to do it either, or pressured, or whatever the case is. Just it helps support those kinds of uploads. So that's my little soapbox spiel for the time being, but we'll keep pressing along and doing all sorts of very fascinating topics in the PlayStation landscape. But having said that, we've got a Click R3 coming up very soon as well. That will probably go live either today or tomorrow. And that is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.